Let's get right into it. And for that, Jeff, we're joined by Matt Waldman. Again, he is the author of the RSP Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Matt, you got John Schmeelk and Jeff Feagles here in the Northeast. Hope you and yours are doing well.
Thanks, John and Jeff. It's a pleasure to be on with you guys.
All right, Matt, we get you every year. And for the folks that don't know, Matt puts out to call it comprehensive would be an understatement. I think you topped 1,000 pages this year, Matt, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, and you just detail the hell out of every quarterback, tight end, receiver, and running back in the draft.
Pretty much, and that's I show my work and pretty much go throughout the year and give you rankings where there's stack ranking by different position-specific areas that are important to each of the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end positions. You get complete ranking sheets. I also do tracking data for quarterbacks and running backs. I'm doing my own tracking data for after contact, because I think oftentimes we see in some of the data world there that you can slap the thigh pad of a player like Saquon Barkley and he gets 60 yards and he earns 60 yards after contact. And while that's great, he's very elusive and he is powerful, that may not be a fair understanding of what power really is. So I've been doing a lot of different things, tweaking over the past 16 years of this, and I think fans of this publication are pretty happy with what they're seeing from the data.
Yeah, to give people an idea, like for wide receiver, for example, he'll have elusiveness, he'll have route running, he'll have hands, and he ranks all the players in all those different categories and different tiers and stuff like that. It's very, very useful information. All right, Matt, let's start here. Do you have a clear-cut number one wide receiver in this class who stands above all others?
I do, and it is Jamar Chase. I mean, when you look at this guy's game, you have to understand that despite the fact that he's only 201 pounds, he plays like a guy who's probably about 10, 15 pounds heavier. You see him do that against physical players in the SEC where he's posting up in down and distance situations that would be reserved for bigger guys, but you can also play in the slot. He has that great initial acceleration and long speed to pull away from defenders, but he can also play against top elite corners who are going to play him physical and tight, and he can win against them. He has terrific movement, ability to use his hands and feet to get off the line, reliable pass catcher. You can play him inside or outside, a lot like his teammate Justin Jefferson or his other teammate Terrace Marshall. All three of those guys are quite versatile, and it's going to show up in the NFL.
Matt, we know about all the big guys, and we talk about them all the time. The Waddles, the Devontae Smith, all those kind of guys, Jamar Chase. Give me, is there somebody that we have not really heard a lot about, because I think a lot of people are talking about even Kyle Pitts being in that receiver category. What's your take on Rashad Bateman? John and I both like this guy. We've talked about him a little bit. What's your take on Rashad?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rashad Bateman. He's probably higher on my list than most. And I think a lot of people saw last year and they saw a different Bateman, because what people may not realize is he had COVID over the summer and he lost a ton of weight.
Oh, wow.
And so he ended up coming into the season. He opted out originally, and then he came back and played, and he wasn't at his optimal weight. And he was playing in an offense where they used him more as a horizontal stretch player than the vertical wonder kind that he was in 2019 opposite Tyler Johnson, who's with the Buccaneers now. And Bateman in 2019 was a powerhouse because not only could he get off press, work inside over the middle, he has excellent skill after the catch. He's kind of to me, he's a combination of Keenan Allen. I mean, and I'm talking stylistically, of what Keenan Allen and Mike Thomas do, and the fact that he can work inside, outside, and work over the middle and get yards after the catch, and a little bit of Cordero Patterson in the ability to actually win the ball and to be able to run after the catch with a little bit of power and shake. And this is a guy that he gained some of that weight back during the off season. He had some trouble getting it back on during the year, but because he had a real tough bout with the illness, but he's about halfway there, and I think at one point we're going to see him at about 210, 215 before his career's over, and you're going to see that explosion, that catch radius. I think he's one of the best 5 receivers in this class.
Matt, if the Giants want to go wide receiver at 11 and they're staring at both Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith, what should be their calculation as to which guy you think will be the better pro and fits into what the Giants need based on who they have on their roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think with them, you see that you've got a big guy like Galladay who's going to be able to kind of erase any kind of inaccuracies where the ball isn't exactly pinpoint, so you can get him to stretch the field from the outside or above. And when you look at a guy like Shepard or Darius Slayton, these are guys that also can stretch the field. And to me, if they're both playing outside, and you probably want them both playing outside most of the time, I'd rather have Waddle, because what Waddle does in the middle of the field and how just blindingly quick he is, you get a little bit of that Tyreek Hill ability in terms of after the catch, because he's so efficient, so fast. He's a tough player in the middle of the field as well, being able to go up and win the ball. I think he's a clutch receiver. This is a guy that can play inside and outside for you, but he gives you a little bit of what you guys saw across town back in the early 2000s in Santana Moss, a player who can win the ball in physical ways, but also a very technically sound receiver and dynamic with his speed. And when you look at the rules today, and it's not like these receivers get a little bit more of a free pass than Santana Moss did at the line of scrimmage. And Waddle is a tough enough guy, probably to have played in either era, even though his size may not be great. But when I look at him, he could be the best overall weapon in this class. That gives you the versatility to make him a gadget player when you need him to be, but he's a lot more than that. He's not a Tavon Austin type who's very limited in his skill. This is a guy that is a true receiver who just also has some trump cards in his athletic traits that just make him absolutely dynamic.
This weekend we had the medicals. Are you hearing anything out of with Jalen Waddle and his medical issues with that ankle? I know we talk a little bit about it. Are other teams worried about that, or is that something that you think is going to be okay?
I think it's going to be okay. I think he just tried to come back too early. It was kind of that hyper-competitive thing when we saw, say, for instance, way back in the day when Jerry Rice, injured his ACL and then tried to come back within the same season, and you just won. I think this was a situation where he just made an ill-advised call trying to be a competitor, and he wasn't quite ready yet. But based on the prognosis, from most doctors when they talk about the type of injury that he had, he should be good to go.
You mentioned Terrace Marshall, who I think would be interesting if he somehow got to the Giants at 42. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just assume for the sake of this conversation he does. He's a guy that played outside, then he played a little bit more in the slot. I wouldn't necessarily consider him sudden, Matt, but he does manage to get some separation. I'm not sure. Doesn't look like he's going full speed all the time, but maybe that's just his long strides that are fooling me. Your thoughts on Marshall as a prospect? What does he do well, and what type of role do you think he would fit best in as a pro?
It's funny, I just put something out on my site about a half hour ago showing about 10 minutes of video analysis with him. And the thing about Marshall is that he is a technically sound player who uses his footwork and pacing well, which can kind of fool defenders, especially working on the inside. When you see him on the inside, he'll play with pacing enough that he's able to, break across the middle, get the ball, and he's very efficient. One of the things that he does extremely well that a lot of good athletes don't do early on in the NFL is that he transitions downhill. You have a former Rutgers wide receiver coach by the name of Drew Lieberman, who does some great work on YouTube that I recommend. It's called the Sideline Hustle. One of the things that he coined as a term to transition downhill is catching and piercing, immediately getting downhill. And you can watch him against teams like South Carolina and Vanderbilt. Well, he does that extremely well. Catching routes that are crossing routes, and instead of continuing through the break, horizontally, he gets downhill vertically, ends up getting behind the backs of defenders who are flowing, and turns these plays into huge gains. And he does this on a regular basis. But you also have a guy who can be physical enough on the outside that when he can bait people with, turning back and looking for the ball about 15 yards earlier than where the ball is going to actually go, and get the defender to turn, and then he can work by them, use his hands, and kind of frame the separation so that the defenders reaching for him can't, get back into his frame. And even if they do get an arm, he has the concentration to be able to make, one-handed grabs. He's not afraid to go into the teeth of the defense. I think this guy is more than fast enough, more than quick enough. He's just a technically sound guy who can give you, a little bit of, pacing to change things up, and he has a wide catch radius, and wins the ball early, which is an important phase. He understands how to attack the ball against tight coverage, and he has the concentration and focus to deal with, safeties or linebackers who might flash within his, his range as he's catching the ball and still be able to come down with it. I think he's a very good player.
Matt, I had a question for you. So with COVID and all these opt-outs, there's a lot of questions from some of these players throughout the draft, whether they're, booked to be around first round, second round, third round. Is there any type of information that's kind of surfacing around the league and the scouting departments that people are looking more at or not looking at enough that you want to, when we evaluate these guys that did opt out? Is there some sort of an analytics number, or is there a testing number that these guys are looking at just because they didn't play this last year?
It's a great question, and I think it's more of on an individual basis when you look at these guys. I mean, because maybe the biggest obstacle or problematic thing is that because you don't have a combine where it's in one place, the settings are different enough that, the grass can be shaved down a little bit more to make a faster track. The facilities areas might be able to have a little bit more elasticity to, where they're running on the ground. That might add just a tiny little bit. There are teams that have pro days where, the guys in their junior year did better than their senior year, and somehow those junior year numbers get sent off the teams. So it's one of those deals where I think that while the edges are small, they can be enough to make a little bit of a difference. So it's one of those things, the lack of that kind of controlled setting, it makes it a little more problematic.
All right, let's talk about this second group of wide receivers. Once you get past that elite group, Matt, who besides, and you already talked about Bateman, who in that second group of prospects do you really think people are sleeping on that they should be thinking more about and could be really good value for the Giants if they don't go receiver in the first round and they look at a player at 42?
Yeah, there's a number of guys. Tylan Wallace and Frank Darby are really good. Tylan Wallace is a field stretcher who tore his ACL last year, played with a brace this year, ended up injuring the knee the second to last game of the season, and still played the bowl game with that injured knee where he had torn the ACL, played through it, and then he had a really strong pro day and looks like he's regained that speed back. He's a ball winner. He's a tough guy who's smaller but knows how to block, knows how to run, can play probably inside or work to the inside a little bit. He would be fun to check out. If you're looking for a slot guy, Jalen Darden out of North Texas is, this is a guy that, certainly he's like a puff, a whiff of smoke, really, when it comes to once he gets the ball, he just leaves defenders, grasping for air, even if they're like maybe a foot or two away from him. He's that quick. If you're looking for someone a little bigger who you can also isolate to the outside but work inside, Josh Palmer kind of has some of that Hakeem Nicks kind of style to him. Same with Cornell Powell, but I prefer Palmer out of Tennessee. He's a little more physical. I think he runs. I think he's a little better at the line of scrimmage, and he's very good at the catch point. He's someone you can isolate off play action, but you can also get him in the middle of the field with some nice routes there. And I think those are guys. Maybe Des Fitzpatrick, who has nice speed, nice size, 6'2", 208, who has to work a little bit on his route running, but I think the way he tracks the ball and wins after the catch could be compelling. And if you're looking for a guy who can play slot and outside, Dwayne Eskridge, I affectionately call him a little punk because as a blocker, he's a former cornerback who he plays like a cornerback at the wide receiver position as a blocker. He gets under the skin of wide receivers by just playing a little extra to that echo of the whistle, to the point that he gets the opposing defender really upset with him early on, and then he acts like he's about to do that and stops, and defenders now start drawing penalties against him. And then as the game goes on, he then starts really laying it to them with really strong technique. He knows how to slap the hands away from a defender, get into his body, and he has 4.3 speed. He has some issues with some drops occasionally. I'd be careful about him holding on to the ball, but there's some dynamic skill to his game, and he's an instigator in a fun way.
Well, a lot of options. It seems to be a pretty heavy class, as we knew coming into this draft. John, why don't we segue over to the running back positions? And Not a sexy position these days. I feel like when you look at the draft, there's not too many of them in there. Give me your rundown. I like the two guys from North Carolina, Javonte Williams, and also Michael Carter. My son went to North Carolina. We watch a lot of that football on TV, so I got to see those guys play a lot. Give us your rundown on the running back position, and maybe the Giants, could they draft somebody, middle round, fourth, fifth round, if you have a guy for us there.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And it's funny, my wife is a North Carolina Tar Heel through and through. So, she won't even let me mention that school that's the rival that cannot be named.
Of course you can't. No. There's no real players coming out of that anyways, right? So we don't even have to mention them today.
That's right. But when we were profiling that quarterback of yours, it was
I know, right? Yes.
Awful. But yeah, overall, I mean, you look at Carter and Williams; they're excellent players. I mean, Williams might be the safest back in this class, just from the standpoint of you look at the prototype in terms of 5'9", 212. That's kind of in the beginnings of the wheelhouse of what you want to look for in a back. Who's going to carry the ball, at a higher workload, can catch. He's very good in terms of being able to block and pick up stunts. He has the size and the technique to be able to handle linebackers and safeties, and he can at least, hold off a defensive end or some defensive ends for long enough for a quarterback to get out of the pocket. As a guy, he reminds me a lot of Mark Ingram, a guy that's steady, who can give you strong production and a good offense, and even in a more struggling offense, he's going to at least make the right decisions for you to be able to keep the chains moving. And then when you look at Carter, obviously this is a guy that, on one end you could talk about how good of his receiving skills are. He's someone that can give you maybe that James White type of thing at the very least, because he's very good working over the middle of the field in zones. He has the speed. He has more speed than White. He has more, agility and understanding of how to run between the tackles. He has a very good feel of being able to avoid contact to his feet and get his feet up and away from defenders, even those in pursuit of him. He just has excellent spatial awareness of what's going on around him. And then, at the best, he might be a little more than that. Maybe a Giovanni Bernard. Maybe if you can squint a little hard enough, maybe there's a little Alvin Kamara to his game, which is kind of fascinating. I think he's a very promising player. Now, guys who you might be able to get later, and if Saquon, hopefully Saquon Barkley comes back stronger than ever. But if that doesn't happen, a guy like Khalil Herbert out of Virginia Tech and transferred from Kansas, this is a guy who reminds me a lot of Dalvin Cook in style. He has what a guy by the name of Sean Miska, who's a coach of guys like Everson Griffith and a number of defensive ends, and he's a movement specialist, talks about it as curvy linear movement. That's kind of like think of a racing cycle taking a hairpin turn, and it kind of curls around without losing much acceleration. Well, Dalvin Cook's like one of the best at that, because he's not a hard cutting back, and the analytics people kind of missed on him because they didn't match. Oftentimes they try to match the workout metrics to what the player does, and sometimes they have to understand that maybe what the player does doesn't match the metrics, but he's still good. And Cook was that kind of player. He never really makes hard cuts. He kind of uses his feet and moving in small steps to kind of change direction, or that uses that curvilinear movement. And Herbert is similar to that, but he also has cutting ability. He has speed. He's someone that breaks a lot of tackles, a lot of contact in terms of reaches and wraps to his frame, and he can run outside zone. He can run inside. He can run some gap plays for you, so he's a versatile guy that you can probably get a little bit later. If you're looking for a guy who might be able to help you out as a runner for stretches in terms of being a starter, but may never be the guy you're always going to want to lean on, but he has the burst and the size. Larry Roundtree of Missouri could be that dynamic second back who you wouldn't mind giving carries to every game to spell your top running back and know you can lean on him as a starter. He's a very strong guy, and I'm a Ramondre Stevenson fan, and I like Jamar Jefferson as well. Stevenson may go a little bit earlier, but he's a guy that I wonder if he has more upside with his body as he was reframing it, because he was 250 when he came to Oklahoma, and then lost 20 pounds while he was playing. And I think he's still kind of figuring out what, trying to reshape his body. And it could be a Le'Veon Bell situation where you see him become a quicker player by year 2 in the NFL. And he has great feet. He understands that he's a big back. He'll definitely take it to box defenders and win in collisions. And he has unbelievably soft hands. And he's probably one of the best pass protectors in this class.
Final question from me, Matt, and then Jeff will ask you about the tight ends. Who's your favorite offensive weapon? The guy that you can just get the ball to and tell him to go make a play. You can make this a running back. You can make it one of those, gadget wide receivers, a combo, whomever you like. Who's the guy that you can say that's going to be my yak monster, that you can just get the ball to and, dude, go out there and make a play?
Yeah, to me, it's the guy that we talked about earlier, Jalen Waddle.
All right, Matt, I'm going to make this tougher for you. Take Jalen Waddle out of the equation. After Jalen Waddle, who's the next guy for you?
Who's the next guy that I would put into that situation? Well, if he can stay healthy, I would say it's between Rondale Moore and Kadarius Toney, really. Those two guys. Moore, if he just strikes me sometimes as he's a player that if he's not healthy, then it's like it's 0 or 100 with him. And we've seen receivers in the past. I mean, Sterling Sharp recently had his birthday. I saw that on Twitter. He was a player that could play hurt and still be a league leader. And if Rondale Moore can show that he can play while being dinged up a little bit, he could be a dynamic force because what he does in the slot, he's so blindingly quick. And then Kadarius Toney, similar thing in terms of his balance, his ability to win in the open field, and he can win on the outside. He has good tracking. He reminds me a lot of Golden Tate when Tate was with the Lions, with those 90 catch, 100 catch, 1,100, 1,200 yard seasons. He has better hands and tracking in terms of technique than what Tate was. Tate was kind of the exception that proved the rule that, he didn't always use correct hands position to win the ball, but he could win it. He was one of the few guys that I've ever graded who could do that. It was basically him, Early Doucette, and Ted Ginn, but he was by far better than those two other guys at it. But those are the only three that have had any semblance of a career in the NFL who've had those issues and were able to produce.
Matt, I'm not gonna bore our listeners again with my Kyle Pitts infatuation, but I know that he is obviously just off the charts with the position and just his ability to play receiver and wide receiver. Behind him, it's a pretty big drop. Give me an idea of maybe your top 2 or 3 tight ends after him that did you think that maybe the Giants could go after? I mean, they have a free agent in Kyle Rudolph. They have Evan Ingram on a 5th-year contract coming in here. Is there somebody in the draft that maybe the Giants could look at in that maybe 4th round, maybe the 3rd round, somewhere in there?
Sure. I think obviously Pat Freiermuth is an excellent blocker, but he's going to go in the 2nd round, and he's kind of more of a Heath Miller type in terms of his athletic ability. Brevin Jordan is a guy out of Miami who's, in the same kind of weight range as Ingram. He has the quickness to win up the seam. He's a steady pass catcher. He's actually, I think he's a better blocker than what Ingram was when Ingram came out of Ole Miss. Jordan reminds me a lot of Irv Smith in the way that he's undersized but can play the wing. He can block. And with what you guys have at depth with like Toilolo, who played down here in Atlanta for a number of years and might as well be another offensive lineman playing in the tight end position, and Caden Smith, who's a nice blocker, you can get some nice work out of Jordan from the wing and use him in a variety of ways. He's very good after the catch. Tommy Tremble is an ascending prospect out of Notre Dame who also plays really hard. He has that special teams mentality.
He can play fullback too.
Yeah, he can play fullback, so you get the versatility out of him. Certainly can track and catch the ball well. So those are 2 guys right off the bat. And then when you want to go a little bit deeper than that, Hunter Long is a guy that may not excite a ton of people, but he has the quickness to stretch the seam. He knows how to catch the ball well. I think he has the makings to become a better blocker than a lot of the tight ends the 2 tight ends that I just talked about. And so as the Boston College prospect might be available at that range. And then if you're going to go even maybe just a little bit deeper, Sean Bayer out of Iowa is the guy that George Kittle, liked how this guy moves. He's a former receiver who needed a little more time than they wanted. than they wished it took for him to put on the weight. But he's 6'5", 250, tracks the ball well, runs fast enough to stretch the seam, makes some incredible catches with his catch radius and his experience as being a wide receiver prospect early on in his career. And I think that maybe he could be a late bloomer for a team.
Matt, tell the folks where they can find you on Twitter and how they can get your draft guide.
Sure. You can find me at Matt Waldman, simple as that. And my draft guide is www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. Percentage of the purchase goes to Darkness to Light, which is an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children, and by training all sorts of individuals, groups, organizations, government, schools, things like that. Been given to it since 2011, and this month is Child Abuse Prevention Month. So it's timely. We gave about $4,000 just this month alone, and plan on giving more as the time goes on.
Matt,
Very nice.
Awesome stuff, my friend. Great stuff as always. It's always fun talking to you during draft season, and we'll catch up to you soon. All right, pal?
Thank you, Matt.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, guys.